Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. The hiss of the pressurized door closing behind Sergeant Luke Carson signaled the beginning of what promised to be an exhausting journey. The Resolute Star, a refurbished military transport ship, was cramped at the best of times, but with its passenger list swelling from the recent evacuation, even the officers' quarters were being repurposed. Luke slung his pack onto the floor of the room he'd been assigned, his sharp blue eyes scanning its meager furnishings. A small table bolted to the wall, a narrow bed with a standard-issue mattress, and just enough room to turn around without bumping into the bulkhead. Not bad, he thought, until he noticed the second set of belongings already stowed neatly in the corner. Unacceptable, a voice snapped, musical yet imperious. Luke turned and found himself face to face with Adraxian. Her golden skin glimmered faintly under the overhead light, and her dark almond-shaped eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down. She wore the distinctive robes of Draxian royalty, though they were slightly tattered from recent events. "You must be kidding me," Luke muttered under his breath. "Sergeant Carson," the ship's quartermaster explained from the doorway, looking harried, "this is Princess Theluna of the Draxian Empire. Due to space constraints, you'll be sharing this room. And the bed." Luke raised an eyebrow. "There's no way this is regulation." "It's an order," the quartermaster replied, already retreating. "You two are adults. Figure it out." Luke sighed, turning to face Theluna, who looked as if she'd rather share a room with a rabid Teresian scorpion. "This isn't ideal for either of us, Princess," he said, his voice gruff but even. "Let's make the best of it." Theluna folded her arms, the motion as graceful as a dance. "I will require solitude and absolute silence for meditation each evening. Your barbaric habits will not disrupt me." Luke snorted. "Barbaric, huh? You're the one who'll have to deal with my snoring. Hope your meditation can handle that." Her eyes narrowed further, but she said nothing. As the hours stretched on, the tension in the room thickened. Every movement, whether it was Luke cleaning his gear or Theluna adjusting her robes, seemed like an intrusion on the other's space. When the time came to rest, the inevitable awkwardness of sharing a bed hung heavily in the air. "I'll sleep on the floor," Luke offered, already unrolling a spare blanket. "Good," Theluna replied sharply, though her voice softened slightly as she added, "Thank you." Luke shrugged. "Don't mention it." But as he lay on the cold metal floor, listening to the hum of the ship and the steady breathing of the alien princess above him, he couldn't help but wonder how long either of them would survive this arrangement, let alone the journey ahead. Luke Carson woke up with a crick in his neck and a knot in his back. Sleeping on the cold, unforgiving floor of the Resolute Star was taking its toll, but the alternative, sharing a bed with a Draxian princess, was out of the question. As he sat up, rubbing his aching shoulder, he noticed Theluna already awake. She was seated cross-legged on the bed, her eyes closed, her golden skin catching the faint light of the room's small viewport. A faint hum filled the air, a low, melodic sound that seemed to resonate deep within his chest. "What's that?" Luke asked, his voice breaking the silence. Theluna's eyes snapped open, irritation flickering across her face. "Meditation. A practice that strengthens the mind and spirit." Luke snorted. "Yeah, well, your strengthening sounds a lot like humming to me." Theluna shot him a withering look. "And your snoring sounds like an injured Zathorn beast." Yet I endured it in silence. Luke raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough." The uneasy truce established the night before seemed fragile at best. As Luke pulled on his boots, the princess rose gracefully from the bed, smoothing the fabric of her robes. "You humans," she said, her tone lofty, "have little appreciation for the finer disciplines of the mind. Always rushing, always fighting." Luke arched a brow. "And you Draxians? Sitting around meditating while the galaxy burns?" Theluna stiffened, but before she could reply, a sharp beep from the comm unit interrupted them. "Sergeant Carson, Princess Theluna," came the voice of Commander Rhea over the intercom. "Report to the briefing room immediately." The briefing room was cramped like everything else aboard the Resolute Star. Luke and Theluna squeezed into seats at the long table alongside a mix of human and Draxian officers. A hologram of a star map flickered to life in the center of the table, displaying a series of glowing red markers. "These are the locations of the recent attacks," Commander Rhea said, her voice steady but grim. "The raiders have been targeting ships carrying evacuees. We believe they're after something, or someone, specific." All eyes turned to Theluna. She met the stares with cool composure. "You think they're after me?" she said, her tone more statement than question. "It's a possibility," Rhea admitted. "Princess, you're carrying information critical to ending this war. We need to ensure you reach your destination safely. Luke leaned forward. And if they come for her? What's the plan? Rhea's expression hardened. We'll do whatever it takes to protect her, and the rest of this crew. Back in their quarters, the tension between Luke and the Luna had shifted. Where before there had been disdain, there was now something more complicated. A shared understanding of the danger they faced. I assume you're armed? The Luna asked, watching as Luke inspected his sidearm. Always, he replied, not looking up. What about you? You got any of those fancy Draxian energy blades hidden in your robes? The Luna's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. I prefer to rely on my wits. They're far sharper than any blade. Luke chuckled. Wits are great, but they won't stop a blaster bolt. I've survived this long, she said, her tone carrying an edge of pride. Fair point, Luke conceded. Despite their differences, they spent the next hour working out a rudimentary plan. Luke showed the Luna how to handle a standard-issue human pistol, and she demonstrated a few Draxian techniques for disabling an opponent without lethal force. Their impromptu training session was interrupted by the ship's alarm. All hands prepare for evasive maneuvers, blared the voice of the ship's pilot over the intercom. Luke and the Luna exchanged a glance. Stay close, Luke said, grabbing his weapon. The corridors of the Resolute Star were chaos. Crew members rushed to their stations as the ship rocked violently under enemy fire. Luke led the way, his movements practiced and sure, while the Luna followed with surprising agility for someone in royal robes. They reached the central hold, where a group of raiders had already breached the ship. The intruders were humanoid but wore sleek, black armor that obscured their features. Blaster fire lit up the room as Luke dove behind a crate, pulling the Luna down with him. Stay here, he ordered. Before she could argue, he popped up and fired, taking out 2 raiders with precise shots. The Luna watched, her expression unreadable, as he moved with the confidence of a seasoned soldier. But the raiders were relentless. One of them broke through Luke's line of fire, charging directly at their hiding spot. Luke raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the Luna sprang into action. With a fluid motion, she grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and swung it at the raider, knocking him off balance. A second blow to the head left him unconscious. Luke blinked, momentarily stunned. Not bad, Princess. The Luna smirked. I told you, Sergeant. I rely on my wits and my instincts. Together, they fought their way through the remaining raiders. Luke's precision and the Luna's resourcefulness made them an unexpectedly effective team. When the last of the attackers were subdued or fled, the two stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily. Looks like you can handle yourself after all, Luke said, his tone grudgingly respectful. And you're not as barbaric as I thought, the Luna replied, a glimmer of warmth in her voice. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the walls of animosity between them beginning to crumble. Then the ship lurched violently, and the intercom crackled to life. This isn't over yet, came Commander Rhea's voice. We've got more hostiles incoming. All hands prepare for another wave. Luke and the Luna exchanged a grim nod. The battle, and their unlikely partnership, was far from over. The Resolute Star shuddered violently under a fresh barrage of fire. Luke and the Luna barely had time to recover before the ship's alarm blared again, signaling a second wave of hostiles. Stick close to me, Princess, Luke said, pulling her behind cover as they hurried through the narrow corridor toward the ship's control center. I'm not helpless, Sergeant, the Luna replied, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. The events of the past hour had stripped some of the distance between them. You're not, Luke agreed. But you're still my responsibility. The Luna opened her mouth to argue but stopped short when the door to the control center slid open, revealing a scene of chaos. Smoke billowed from damaged consoles, and the crew worked frantically to restore order. Commander Rhea stood at the center, barking orders over the din. Glad you made it, Rhea said as she spotted them. We've got a problem. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Resolute Star surrounded by enemy ships. Sleek and angular, the raiders' vessels darted around the lumbering transport, their firepower far outmatching the ship's defensive capabilities. They're focusing their fire on the engines, Rhea explained. If they disable us, it's over? Luke frowned. What's our plan? We need to take out their lead ship, Rhea said. But our targeting systems are down, and we can't spare the crew to make manual adjustments. Luke's gaze shifted to the map, then to the Luna. You said you were good with strategy, Princess. Think you can figure out their next move? The Luna hesitated, clearly unused to being addressed in such a direct manner. But then she straightened, her eyes narrowing as she studied the display. Their formation suggests a coordinated attack, she said, her voice steady. If we can disrupt their leader, the others may scatter. And how do we do that? Rhea asked. The Luna glanced at Luke. With precision. And someone willing to take a risk. The plan was daring, bordering on reckless. While the Resolute Star provided cover fire, Luke and a small team would board one of the Raider ships to disable its command systems. The Luna, despite Luke's objections, insisted on coming along. I'm not sitting idly by while others fight for me, she said firmly. Luke sighed, checking the charge on his sidearm. Fine. But stay behind me. If things go sideways, we're getting you out of there first. The boarding pod was cramped and silent as they approached the Raider ship. Luke could feel the tension radiating off the others, but he forced himself to focus. He'd been in worse situations before, or so he told himself. When the pod latched onto the Raider ship's hull with a metallic thud, Luke led the charge, his weapon raised. The interior of the ship was dark and angular, its walls covered in strange, glowing symbols. Stick to the plan, Luke said, his voice low. Find the command center and disable their systems. The Luna moved with surprising grace beside him, her keen eyes scanning for threats. When they encountered resistance, Luke handled the fighting while she directed the team, her quick thinking helping them outmaneuver the Raiders. As they pushed deeper into the ship, Luke noticed something strange. The Raiders weren't just targeting the Luna, they seemed to recognize her. Their shouts, though garbled by their helmets, carried a note of urgency whenever she appeared. Why are they so interested in you? Luke asked as they ducked behind cover during a firefight. The Luna's expression darkened. There are factions within my empire that oppose peace. They see me as a threat to their power. And these Raiders work for them? It's possible, she admitted. But we don't have time to dwell on it. Keep moving. They finally reached the command center, a circular room filled with consoles and holographic displays. The Raider captain, a tall figure in black armor, turned to face them, drawing a wickedly curved blade. You shouldn't have come here, the captain growled, his voice distorted by a modulator. Luke raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the captain lunged. The room erupted into chaos as Luke and the captain clashed. The Raider was fast, his blade a blur, but Luke held his ground, using his training to dodge and counter. Meanwhile, the Luna and the others worked to disable the ship's systems. Almost there, one of the crew members shouted. The captain, realizing his ship was about to be disabled, turned his attention to the Luna. Luke saw the movement out of the corner of his eye and acted on instinct, throwing himself between her and the captain's blade. The weapon sliced through Luke's side, and he staggered but managed to fire a shot that hit the captain square in the chest. The Raider collapsed and the room fell silent. Luke? The Luna cried, rushing to his side. I'm fine, he grunted, though the blood soaking his uniform said otherwise. With the Raider ship disabled, the team made their escape, dragging Luke back to the boarding pod. As they returned to the Resolute Star, the Luna stayed by his side, her expression uncharacteristically soft. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yeah, I did, Luke replied, his voice weak but steady. It's my job. Back on the Resolute Star, Luke was rushed to the medbay. The Luna stayed outside the room, pacing as the medics worked. When they finally emerged, they assured her that Luke would recover. Relieved, she went to see him. Luke looked up as she entered, a tired smile on his face. Did we win? We did, the Luna said, sitting beside him. Thanks to you. Luke chuckled, then winced. Guess I'll need a few days off. The Luna hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. You're more than a soldier, Luke. You've proven that to me. The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. For the first time he saw not a princess but a person, one just as scared and uncertain as he was. Thanks, princess, he said, his tone soft. Call me the Luna, she replied. As they sat in silence, the ship hummed around them, a fragile bubble of peace in the chaos of war. The silence in the briefing room was almost suffocating. Everyone had gathered after the successful rescue mission at the colony, but the tension was palpable. Luke sat near the back, arms crossed, watching the crew go over their next course of action. The Luna was at the table, speaking with Commander Rhea in low tones. Her voice, usually so composed and confident, had a slight tremor to it now, betraying the strain she was under. Luke knew she was exhausted. He could see it in the way her eyes darted to the map without really seeing it, the slight slump in her posture when she thought no one was looking. She was holding it together, but barely. Commander Rhea's voice broke through his thoughts. The intel we've gathered from the Raiders' ship suggests that they're closing in on a major Draxian military base. If they succeed in crippling it, it could shift the entire balance of the war in their favor. The Luna nodded, her gaze intense. We can't let that happen. Luke stood and walked over to the table, ignoring the still raw pain in his side. What's the plan? Rhea and the Luna exchanged a brief glance before the commander spoke. We need to get to the base and fortify it before the raiders strike. We'll need every hand and there's no room for hesitation. The Resolute Star can provide air support, but the ground team will have to move quickly and stay ahead of the enemy. The Luna looked at Luke, her expression unreadable. I'll lead the ground team. Luke's brow furrowed. You'll what? You're still recovering, the Luna said, her tone firm but not unkind. This mission is too important. I can't risk. Luke cut her off, his voice low but determined. I'm going whether you like it or not. I'm not letting you go out there alone, princess. She paused, looking at him for a long moment as though weighing something in her mind. Finally she gave a small nod. Very well. But you'll follow my orders. Luke smiled despite the pain in his ribs. Wouldn't have it any other way. The journey to the military base was long, and the tension aboard the Resolute Star was palpable. The crew moved quietly, each lost in their own thoughts, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. They were heading into a storm, he could feel it in his gut. The Luna stood on the bridge, her back straight, her focus unshakable. Despite the gravity of the situation, she remained calm. Luke admired that about her. You're not worried? He asked, walking up beside her. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. But I'm not going to let fear control me. I've seen fear take down a lot of good people, Luke replied, his voice low. But I think you're right. If you let it win, it'll kill you faster than any enemy. The Luna turned to face him, her golden eyes softening. And you? Are you afraid? Luke met her gaze, his own eyes intense. Every damn day. But I still wake up and fight. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the unspoken bond between them stronger than words. Then the Luna broke the silence. We'll win, Luke. We have to. When the Resolute Star finally arrived at the military base, the atmosphere was tense. The sky was dark with clouds, and the faint hum of distant battle could already be heard as the ship descended. The base was built into the side of a mountain, its perimeter fortified with heavy defenses. But the raiders were already closing in. Ground team, move out? Rhea's voice rang out over the comms. Luke and the Luna, along with a squad of elite soldiers, disembarked quickly, their boots hitting the rocky ground with a dull thud. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, and the distant flashes of explosions illuminated the sky. As they approached the entrance to the base, Luke couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were fighting for more than just survival now, they were fighting for the future. The Luna led the charge, her movements swift and decisive. She directed the team with the precision of a seasoned general, her calmness under pressure inspiring the others. Luke followed closely behind her, his instincts sharp, his focus unwavering. The first wave of raiders came at them from the high ground, their weapons blazing. Luke and his team returned fire, taking down several of the attackers, but the raiders kept coming. The Luna stayed at the front, moving with a speed that belied her regal appearance. Luke watched as she dropped to one knee, firing expertly at an enemy combatant before rolling to the side and taking down another. She was a force of nature. They fought their way through the outer defenses, eventually reaching the base's main command center. But the fight wasn't over. As they made their way inside, Luke could hear the sound of footsteps approaching. He tensed, his weapon ready, but the Luna held up her hand to stop him. Wait, she whispered. He looked at her, confused, but she gestured to the walls, where the faintest vibrations could be felt. They're not raiders, she said, her voice low but certain. We've got a bigger problem. Before Luke could respond, the door to the command center slammed open, and a group of heavily armed soldiers in black armor stormed in. Draxian loyalists, the Luna muttered, her expression darkening. Luke's eyes narrowed. You said they were a threat, but I didn't realize they were this deep into your military. They've been working in the shadows, the Luna replied, her voice tight with fury. And now they're trying to sabotage everything I've worked for. Without warning, the loyalists opened fire. Luke dove to the side, taking cover behind a pillar, while the Luna quickly returned fire. Her shots were precise, but the loyalists had the advantage of numbers. They were well trained, their movements synchronized. We need a plan now? Luke shouted. The Luna glanced at him, her eyes steely with resolve. We're not backing down. If we fall, we take them with us. Luke nodded, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They couldn't let these traitors succeed, not now, not when they were so close to winning. As the battle raged on, Luke and the Luna fought side by side, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing second. But in the back of Luke's mind, something nagged at him. This was more than just a fight for survival. This was about everything they had worked for, the future of both their people. And it was becoming clearer with each passing moment that the price of victory would be steep. The sound of gunfire echoed through the command center as Luke and the Luna pressed forward, moving with practiced precision despite the overwhelming odds. The Loyalist soldiers, elite operatives trained for this kind of sabotage, were relentless, their assault fierce and coordinated. Luke's breath came in ragged bursts as he ducked behind cover, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of weakness. The Luna was a blur of motion beside him, her golden eyes sharp and unyielding as she directed fire, taking down one of the attackers with a clean shot. "Clear the hallway," one of Luke's squad mates yelled from behind them. "We need to seal the doors." Luke nodded sharply, signaling to the Luna. They moved as one, their coordinated steps a perfect dance of strategy honed by hours of training and battlefield experience. They were a team now, not just a soldier and a princess but two people who trusted each other to survive. "Let's finish this," the Luna said, her voice tight with determination. She raised her weapon, moving toward the enemy's position. Luke followed, instinctively covering her as they advanced through the smoke-filled corridor. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about stopping the destruction before it spread any further. If the Loyalists succeeded in sabotaging the base, it would set the war back by years. The Luna's mission would be in jeopardy. As they neared the central control room, they encountered more resistance. The Loyalists knew they were close to the heart of the base, and their firepower became even more deadly. Explosions rang out, and the walls seemed to shake with the force of the blasts. Luke pushed forward, his adrenaline pumping, but he was starting to feel the toll of the fight. The pain in his side had returned with a vengeance, a constant throb that made each movement feel heavier. Still he ignored it, focusing on the mission at hand. The Luna noticed the strain in his face but said nothing. She had learned long ago that strength wasn't always physical. She trusted Luke's resolve as much as her own. Together they would finish this. The door to the control room slid open with a metallic hiss, and the scene inside was chaos. Loyalist soldiers had taken position around the control consoles, their weapons trained on the central panel that governed the base's defenses. Luke's hand tightened around his weapon as he scanned the room, assessing the situation. There were at least 10 Loyalists inside, far more than they had anticipated. "We need a distraction," Luke muttered. The Luna met his gaze, her eyes narrowing with thought. Then, without a word, she reached for a small device at her belt and activated it. A sudden burst of static filled the room, followed by a massive power surge that caused several of the Loyalists to stagger, their systems temporarily disabled. "Now?" the Luna shouted, and they charged. The Loyalists recovered quickly, but the moment of disorientation had given Luke and the Luna the edge they needed. They moved with deadly intent, taking down the enemy one by one. Luke's shots were precise, his instincts guiding him as he cleared a path toward the central console. The Luna, in the meantime, was a whirlwind of action, her movements fluid and calculated. She had grown up with weapons training, but this was different. This wasn't some sparring match. This was real, and every move could mean life or death. A Loyalist charged toward her, his rifle raised, but the Luna was faster. She ducked low, sweeping his legs out from under him with a quick maneuver before slamming the butt of her weapon into his chest. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. "Keep moving," Luke called out, his voice tight as the remaining Loyalists regrouped. They were cornered now, but the situation had shifted. The Luna pushed forward, her eyes locked on the central console. "We need to disable the controls. If we don't, they'll lock us in here and blow the base." Luke's heart skipped a beat. "We can't let that happen." Together they reached the console, but just as the Luna began to input the override codes, a figure stepped into their line of sight. The leader of the Loyalists. A tall man in black armor, his face obscured by a helmet, but the coldness in his eyes was unmistakable. He was the one who had orchestrated this entire attack. "You think you can stop this?" the man's voice boomed, distorted by his helmet. "Your rebellion is meaningless. The Empire will burn, and so will you." Luke's blood ran cold. He recognized the insignia on the man's armor, an emblem that had once belonged to a faction within the Draxian military, a group that had once stood for peace. But now they had become zealots, driven by a twisted vision of power. "You'll never get away with this," Luke said, his voice steady despite the anger rising in him. The man chuckled darkly. "I already have." With a swift motion he pulled out a detonator. Luke's instincts kicked in before he could fully process what was happening. He lunged toward the man, but not fast enough. The detonator's signal had already been sent. The Luna's eyes widened in shock. No? But it was too late. The entire base trembled as a massive explosion erupted from the depths of the facility. The ground shook beneath them and the lights flickered, casting long shadows in the control room. The Luna collapsed to her knees, her eyes wide with disbelief. It's over? No, Luke said, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. It's not. We can still stop them. We can still? But he was interrupted by the loud, blaring alarms that filled the room. The explosion had triggered a chain reaction, and the base's systems were now locked down. It was clear that they were trapped. We're running out of time, Luke said, his mind racing. We need to get to the escape pods. Now. The Luna nodded, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. She knew what the destruction of the base meant. It wasn't just a setback. It was a blow that might cripple the fight for peace between their people. As they made their way toward the exit, Luke's thoughts drifted to the price of war. He had always known it was costly, but today he realized just how high the stakes truly were. The base was dying, and with it so was the hope that they could end this conflict without more bloodshed. But the Luna was still alive, and that meant the fight wasn't over. They would regroup, rebuild, and push forward. Come on, Luke said, his voice rough but determined. We're not done yet. The Luna looked at him, a flicker of resolve returning to her gaze. No. We're not. Together they ran toward the escape pods, ready to face whatever came next. The escape pods were cramped, the sterile interior giving off a faint mechanical hum as they sped away from the dying base. Luke and the Luna sat in silence, the gravity of their situation weighing on both of them. Outside the viewport, the flickering light from the base's destruction illuminated the void of space, the shockwaves from the explosion dissipating in all directions. It was over, at least for the base. But the fight for peace, continued. Luke had his arms crossed, his face etched with exhaustion, but his mind was still racing. They had succeeded in stopping the Loyalists from completely sabotaging the base, but the damage had been done. The blast would delay their efforts, cost them precious time. Worse, it would undoubtedly fuel the fire of those who still wanted war between their people. The Luna was staring out the viewport, her profile sharp and regal, though her shoulders were tense, her gaze far away. He could see the weight she carried, the weight of her people, her family, the future she was fighting to protect. The Luna, Luke said, his voice soft but firm. We're not giving up. We'll find another way. She turned to face him, her golden eyes locking onto his with a mixture of sadness and resolve. How much longer can we keep fighting, Luke? How many more lives will be lost before this ends? Luke didn't have an answer for her. He knew how many had already fallen in the name of peace, how many more would before the war was over. But he also knew one thing for sure, as long as they were alive they would keep fighting. Because peace was worth every sacrifice. We'll find a way, he repeated. We have to. The Luna nodded slowly, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes didn't fade. The longer I fight, the more I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. If this mission is even worth it anymore. We're fighting against our own people, Luke. People who have been my family, my allies. They've betrayed everything we stood for. Luke leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. And you're still standing. You're still fighting. That's what matters. You're not alone in this. You've got us. You've got me. Her eyes softened at his words, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow crossing her face. She didn't respond immediately, and for a long moment, the only sound in the pod was the hum of the engines and the distant explosions echoing from the base's destruction. You don't have to keep fighting for me, the Luna said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. You've done more than enough. Luke met her gaze and shook his head. I fight for more than just you, the Luna. I fight for the future, for what we can build together. We're not enemies anymore. We're allies. You don't have to carry the weight of this war alone. A faint, uncertain smile appeared on her face, but it was brief. I wish it were that simple. Before Luke could respond, the comms buzzed to life, cutting through the tension. This is Commander Rhea, came the familiar voice of their commander, crisp and professional. We've received the signal from the escape pods. Headed toward Rendezvous Point Delta. Prepare for extraction. We've made contact with the resistance forces. They're ready to meet us halfway. Luke's heart leapt at the news. The resistance. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. They had allies, real, tangible allies, and this could be the turning point. We're almost there, Luke said, his voice full of quiet relief. We'll be okay. The Luna didn't say anything, but her eyes softened as she looked at him, her expression less burdened than before. The rendezvous was tense. As the escape pod docked with the larger ship that had been waiting in the distance, Luke could feel the shift in the air, The palpable sense of uncertainty, the fear that they might be walking into an ambush. The mission had been successful, but it had been a near thing. There was no guarantee that the resistance would be able to protect them or help them defeat the loyalists in the long run. Luke and the Luna were escorted to the command deck of the resistance ship, where they were met by a grizzled officer with a thick beard and tired eyes. His uniform was worn, patches from various skirmishes littering it like a testament to the struggles they had endured. "You're the princess?" the officer asked, his voice rough but respectful. The Luna nodded. "Yes, I am. We've heard about your work. The whole damn galaxy has," he said, his eyes briefly scanning her. "And we're here to help. You've got a lot of support behind you, princess. People who want this war to end as much as you do." The Luna looked at him, her eyes full of a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "We need more than just support. We need action. We need to expose the loyalists. The factions within the Draxian Empire must be revealed for what they truly are, traitors to everything we stand for." The officer's face hardened. "That's easier said than done. But you're not wrong. We've been gathering intel on them, but they've buried themselves deep. If we don't act fast, they could tear this whole thing apart." Luke stepped forward, his presence calm and steady despite the tension in the room. "Then we act fast. We work together. Whatever it takes to bring this war to an end." The officer looked at him, sizing him up before nodding. "You're not just a soldier, are you?" Luke shook his head. "No. I'm someone who believes in what this fight means. And I'm here to make sure we win." The officer smiled slightly. "Good. We'll need people like you in the coming days." As the days passed, Luke, the Luna, and the Resistance worked together, planning their next moves. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and deception at every turn. But there was one thing that was becoming clear. They were not alone in this fight anymore. Luke and the Luna spent long hours discussing strategy, learning from each other as they formed a bond that went beyond mere alliance. In many ways, they had become the embodiment of what they were fighting for, a future where people from different worlds, different races, could stand side by side in the face of unimaginable odds. On a quiet evening, after another grueling strategy meeting, the Luna found herself in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Luke joined her a few minutes later, his steps quiet on the metal floor. "You think we're doing the right thing?" she asked, her voice almost lost in the vastness of space. Luke stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the stars too. "I do. We've come this far. We can't stop now." The Luna looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "And after it's over? What then?" Luke met her gaze, his voice steady. "We rebuild. We make a world where we don't have to keep fighting. One step at a time." For the first time in what felt like forever, the Luna allowed herself to hope. The path ahead was long and the sacrifices would be great. But they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. Together they would find a way to bring peace to their people. Together they would fight until the very end. And together they would make sure that the stars, which had once been a symbol of endless war, would one day shine as beacons of a new beginning. The journey toward peace was never going to be simple, but after weeks of planning and skirmishing with the remnants of the Loyalist forces, Luke and the Luna had reached a crossroads. The resistance was growing, and so too were the whispers of change within the Draxian Empire. But the task before them was monumental. One final assault, one final chance to prove to their people that they were more than just soldiers. They were the heralds of a new future, a future that could be shaped not by bloodshed but by unity. The ship was quieter than usual. Luke stood in the operations room, staring out of the viewport at the stars streaking by. His mind was far from the vastness of space, though. His thoughts were consumed by the battle ahead, by the uncertain fate of the galaxy. It was hard to focus, hard to imagine anything other than the weight of the coming conflict. The Luna entered the room, her presence as strong as it ever was, though the lines of exhaustion were beginning to show. Her shoulders were squared, but her gaze was distant. Luke could sense the turmoil inside her, the fear that had begun to grow with each passing day. "You ready for this?" Luke asked, his voice low. She looked at him, a slight frown tugging at her lips. "I don't think anyone could ever be ready for this kind of war, Luke. But I know we don't have a choice. We have to stop them, or else they'll destroy everything we've fought for." Luke nodded, turning toward her fully. "We will. Together." The Luna didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the display in front of her. The intel they had gathered on the Loyalist stronghold was clear. It was going to be a bloodbath. But it was the only chance they had left. If they didn't strike now, the Loyalists would consolidate their power, and the war would drag on for years, perhaps even longer. "We're going to need all the help we can get," the Luna said, breaking the silence. The Resistance, the fleets, we can't take them down alone. Luke glanced at the display showing their fleet's current position. There were reinforcements en route, but time was running out. We'll make it work. We always do. The battle began without warning. The enemy fleet, hidden in the distant reaches of the system, had mobilized with surprising speed. Despite their efforts to prepare, the assault came quicker than expected. As alarms blared and the ship shook under the barrage, Luke's mind raced. This was it. No more time to prepare. No more time to second-guess their strategy. It was all or nothing. Luke and the Luna, along with the rest of their crew, scrambled to their positions. The control room was a flurry of activity, technicians shouting commands, officers coordinating counterattacks. But Luke and the Luna were focused on a single objective: breaking through the enemy's defenses and striking at their leadership. "You're with me on this, right?" the Luna asked as she approached Luke. He gave her a determined look, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Always." The battle raged across the void, starships maneuvering with incredible speed, lasers flashing as the ships danced around each other. But for Luke and the Luna, it was no longer about the ships. It was about the ground assault that would follow. The Loyalist stronghold on the planet's surface was fortified, the walls lined with soldiers and heavy artillery. But they had one advantage: surprise. "We're in," Luke said, watching as their transport pod descended through the atmosphere. "Now we just need to take them down." The ground shook as the pod's landing thrusters fired, and they hit the surface with a jarring thud. Immediately, the doors opened and the Resistance forces surged forward. Luke and the Luna led the charge, their team following closely behind, ready for whatever came next. The Loyalists weren't caught entirely off guard. They had set up defenses on the ground, and the moment the Resistance made contact, all hell broke loose. Gunfire echoed, and the air was thick with smoke and dust as the two forces clashed. The Loyalists had the advantage in numbers, but the Resistance had the element of surprise, and the will to win. Luke moved quickly, using his training and instincts to take out enemy combatants with precision. Every shot counted. Every move had to be perfect. The Luna was at his side, her eyes fierce as she took down one soldier after another. She moved like lightning, her grace and strength unyielding. "This is it," Luke said, his voice grim. "We have to take out their command center." The Luna nodded, leading the way through the chaotic battlefield. The command center was heavily guarded, but Luke had confidence in their team. They were a well-oiled machine, and they weren't about to let the Loyalists take them down now. As they reached the outer gates of the command center, a voice crackled over the comms. "This is Commander Varric. Surrender now and we'll spare your lives. If you resist, we will show no mercy." Luke's hand tightened around his weapon. "I don't think you understand," he said coldly. "This ends now." With a signal, the Luna squad moved in, their weapons raised. The Loyalists, realizing they had no choice but to fight, began to pour out of the command center, engaging the Resistance in full force. The battle was fierce, but the tide had turned. The Loyalists were losing ground quickly, and Luke knew it was only a matter of time before they broke. In the heart of the command center, Luke and the Luna confronted Commander Varric himself. He was standing in front of a massive control panel, his back turned to them, seemingly unconcerned by their arrival. But when he turned to face them, there was no fear in his eyes, only disdain. "I knew you would come for me," Varric said, his voice calm but venomous. "You think you can change everything? You think you can defeat the Empire? The Loyalists will rise again. You cannot stop us." The Luna stepped forward, her eyes cold as ice. "You're wrong. The Empire is falling, and you are the last to realize it." Varric sneered, drawing a weapon from his side. "We'll see who falls." The standoff was brief. With a combination of precise movement and instinct, the Luna and Luke disarmed the commander, forcing him to his knees. The Loyalists who had followed him began to surrender, their will to fight broken. "We've won," Luke said quietly, looking down at the defeated commander. The Luna didn't respond immediately. She simply looked out at the field beyond them, where the last of the Loyalists were being subdued. The battle was over. But the war, her war, was far from finished. The Loyalists had been dealt a severe blow, but the galaxy was still fractured, still divided. There would be no easy road ahead. "Is it enough?" the Luna asked, her voice hollow. Luke placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's a start. The end." Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.